enjoyed the course that you recently attended. I certainly did. And the purpose of this short DVD is just to run through the key learning points that we covered as a reminder for you. I'd first like to just remind us of the learning objectives we set. We said we're going to design and write clear objectives for a presentation. We also said we're going to explain and demonstrate how to structure a presentation. We said we're going to explain and demonstrate how to use effective visual support to give an impactful professional presentation. Also to identify, explain and demonstrate how to deliver a presentation and control nerves. So that was the objective we set. The topics we covered were an introduction to presentation skills, how to prepare a presentation objective, the principles of topic analysis. We looked at preparing the introduction, which is the beginning, preparing the main body, which is the middle, and preparing the summary, which is the end. We had a lot of fun looking at how to deliver and use visual support. And we also looked at delivery techniques and final prep. So let's look at a basic introduction to presentations. There were 3 types of presentation we covered. Persuading, which is perhaps convincing someone to pick up on an idea that you're trying to convince them to use. Also informing them where you're up to, maybe on a budget, on the project you're working to. And we also did say about entertaining, which was like after dinner speeches or someone's leaving do, but we didn't cover that. We only covered the business presentations of persuasion and informing. There was a checklist we covered. We said it was important that you find out about your audience. Make sure that you're in tune with your audience as well. The importance of setting a clear objective, what you want to achieve and where you want your audience to be as a result of your presentation. Do remember, please remember to take time to prepare. Prepare your thoughts, do your research, develop your presentation, and design your visuals to fit your presentation. Rehearse, rehearse, rehearse. Can't say that more than once. We've got to rehearse to make sure it looks very professional. Make sure you check your room in advance and check that the equipment is working. And to make sure you are getting more professional at it, ask for feedback so that you can improve. I'm sure you'll all remember I asked you if you actually do KISS, and that was the principle of KISS. Keep it simple, stupid. By remembering KISS, it will be easier for your audience to remember your key points, easier for you to present, and more likely that you'll achieve your objectives and outcome. So remember, failing to prepare is preparing to fail. And the structure we covered was tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you've told them. And just as a rule of thumb, as a guide, we talked about the 10-80-10 rule. Remember, 10% for the introduction, 80% on the middle, and 10% on the summary. Now let's consider the preparation of presentation objectives. Now what's the purpose of a presentation objective? Well, it's a constant reminder of what you need to achieve when writing the presentation. It also helps you reduce a complicated message into bite-sized chunks. And it also provides you a way of measuring the success of your presentation. It's the anchor. Everything you do is anchored around your actual objective. How do you define your objectives? Where do they come from? They come from analysing your goals. Are you telling? Are you selling? Are you informing? Or are you recapping on the subject? Also, of course, the subject to be presented. Now, is it a skill that you're presenting? Is it just general information? Or are you recapping, say, on a project that you've been working on? The audience is very important. The size of the audience. Also, the level within the company. Are they very senior, junior, middle management? Who are you presenting to? So therefore, their experience and age, and of course, prior knowledge. There's nothing worse than presenting something they already know. Time available. Now, do you go into detail now or later? The important thing is don't try to cover too much and end up not relaying anything except, of course, your own incompetence. Now, quite often people will ask you to do a presentation, even sometimes on the same day they'll say, can you quickly pop up and do a 20-minute presentation this afternoon? Very dangerous. Always ask these questions. Why am I talking about this topic? Who am I talking to? In other words, who's my audience? And what particular areas do you wish me to talk about? If you get it wrong, you'll look silly, so do remember those. Now, We need to also think about the types of words we use. How do we want our audience to have changed as a result of our presentation? Do we want them to be able to identify something? Perhaps contrast two different ideas? Are we trying to convince them to pick up on our idea, our project, what we want them to do? Are we trying to convince them? Are we trying to persuade them? Perhaps we're trying to prove to them this is the best way to go. Or maybe we just want them to be able to explain the importance and gain an understanding of what we're trying to do. So we're just informing them as well, or we want to agree to it. Now, if you remember on the course, we actually put up on flip chart an example presentation objective. And what it was that we said at the end of the presentation, you will be able to understand the new standards of operation and how they will benefit our team in readiness for the start of this important trial that we'll be doing for the rest of the company. So we want them to be able to understand this. Now, once you've written your presentation objective, ask the following questions. Is my intention clear? Does it state what audience response I want? And is that response measurable? We've covered presentation objectives, and as I said in the last part, that is the anchor that you'll use for preparing your presentation. You've now got to decide what you're actually going to put in. What is the content? And that's what we call topic analysis. And this is really the hardest part of the whole thing. This is where the preparation comes into its own. We covered a couple of ways of doing that on the course. One was brainstorming, which was just sitting with a piece of paper and listing all the key areas that you want to cover. The other was mind mapping, which, if you remember, we put the topic in the center and the objective in the center, then we built around it, picking up on our key points. That takes a long time. Once you've got all that down together, you have to look back and say, well, how long have I got? And you may have to start selecting and rejecting material. The main thing to remember is always, always cover the must know. Those are the things that your audience must know, be they legal, health and safety, something to do around the budgets, the things that they must know. Now, if you've been given a 20-minute slot and find that you've got more must-knows than will fit into 20 minutes, well, you really need to go back and say, I need more time, or else you need to consider altering your objective and perhaps only covering a section. So must-knows are the key. Whatever you do, you cover your must-know. Now, if you've got time left over and you think actually that's going to be about 15 minutes, for instance, in a 20-minute presentation, then you can add in things like the should-knows, which are perhaps more detail about the finances, about the figures, the profit you're trying to achieve, etc. If you don't have time left over again, you could then cover what we call the could-knows. And these are things like stories and analogies, which I want you to cover anyway, but they make the whole thing more interesting. But maybe you could cut back on those if you haven't got time to cover all your must-knows. You've now prepared your presentation objective, and you've also done your topic analysis. So we're at the stage now we can start putting our presentation together. And we're going to cover the introduction. Tell them what you're going to tell them. Now, this is vitally important, and as we said, on the 10-80-10 rule, 10% of your presentation approximately should be taken up with the introduction. Now, what sort of things do you need to cover? Well, you must put in some form of grabber. So you can put a grabber in by stating an important fact, perhaps telling an interesting story, relating to something topical, maybe even showing a visual aid or a model of some sort. But it's really trying to turn people on so they sit up and think, oh, this is going to be good, I'm going to listen to this. You need to state the objective of the outcome, how you want them to have changed as a result of your presentation. You've already covered that in your presentational objectives. Important to give them the structure, the key points, the stages, if you like, call it the agenda, perhaps 2 or 3, 4 key things you're going to cover it, so they'll be able to work their way through the presentation with you. Very useful to give them the benefit of them listening, trying to turn them on. Why should they be listening to you? Possibly also let them know that you've acknowledged their own knowledge, so you've already done the research into your audience, you know what they know, and they'll appreciate that greatly. How long the presentation will take. So if it's going to take 20 minutes, tell them that and stick to it. There's nothing worse than saying this is going to take 20 minutes and you're going for 45 minutes. The concentration curve will start to drop. Also, any audience participation you want them to get involved with, i.e., when can they ask questions? Sometimes people get very nervous about asking and answering questions throughout the presentation, so it may be better to take it later, but I will cover that a bit later on. If they don't know you, tell them who you are and what your job is. Useful to give your presentation a title so they know what the topic is, and maybe even the reason for the choice of the topic. Perhaps it fits in with the overall project that you're working on with other departments. If you've done any research into perhaps picking up the stats, tell them the method of research that you covered. So try to get as much as you can in so they know exactly what's going to be happening in the next 20 minutes. You've now completed the introduction. You've told them what you're going to tell them. As we said, that is actually 10% of your presentation. Now we're getting into the meat, we're getting into the filling, the main area of the presentation, which is the middle bit. You're going to tell them. This is 80% approximately of what you're trying to deliver. Now this is complicated because obviously you're taking all the information from your topic analysis or your brainstorm or wherever you've pulled it from, your mind map, all those key areas that you put together. So once you've got that, you've got to think, well, how do I begin to structure my presentation? Well, there's lots of ways of doing it, and it really depends upon what you are presenting. Maybe you can present a statement of a problem followed by a description of a solution. So maybe you've had a problem with materials coming through from the factory, trying to supply it to your clients, or you're having a problem with turnover, returns, whatever it might be. So you explain what the problem is. You then give them the solution you came to, and of course you give them the benefits of those solutions. So it may be better control, happier customers, better turnover, better return profit, whatever it's going to be. So that can be quite useful if there has been a problem. Possibly you might consider arrange them in a sequential order, such as time. That's useful if you're trying to explain a build up to a launch of a new project or product that you're doing, so where you've started, how it's happening, and where it finishes. Or maybe you're actually giving them a story of a project you've been dealing with and how it's gone through in order. Cause and effect. So what are the causes, what are the effects, and the benefit of that solution as well can be another useful way of pulling that together. Now, some people quite like to start and finish with their strongest points and leave the weaker or smaller points in the middle of their session. And the reason for this is that most people remember what is at the beginning and what is at the end. So high points at the beginning, high point at the end, and the detail in the middle. So they're going off remembering what you want them to remember. Order of importance is another way of doing it, highlighting the main points you're delivering in order of increased importance, trying to get them over so they actually are linking through. Simple to complex, and that's a nice way of doing it. Ideas are listed from the simplest to the most complex. So you're actually hooking your audience in. It's easy for them to remember. Then begin to build your story up. And of course, this could be done in reverse order as well. So just a couple of things, so a few things to think about when you're trying to think of what order you're going to put them in. But at the end of the day, how do you support your ideas? Well, you've got to try and make them nice and simple so people remember. How do you want your audience to have changed as a result of your presentation? Now, you usually want to try and present one point at a time. The people will take that in. Don't rush it. Don't go too quickly. Nice, logical sequencing so that people can take everything and give them time to absorb what you're trying to say. Now, back in the introduction, we talked about telling them what you're going to do. In other words, the topics, the key points. I likened it to an agenda. So try to move from one point to the next point smoothly. So I'm now finishing on this point, and these are the things I did. And I'd now like to tell you about what we did. So it could be cause, could be effect, solution, problem, whatever you're going to be going through. Try to spark off interest in people's minds. Give your message impact. The way of doing that is find analogies. Throughout the program, I was talking about planning a tour, planning a trip together. We talked about planning where we're going, setting our objective. We talked about hiring the bus, getting on the bus, introducing ourselves, going on the journey, tell them where we're going to go, and at the end, when we get to our destination, summing up what we've actually done. That's a form of analogy. So using examples and illustrations to highlight what you're trying to do. Try to draw pictures in people's minds. Be descriptive. Describe the scenes. Tell them what happened. Tell them funny stories that will actually enhance the middle part of your presentation. And finally, also use visual support. Don't overuse it. We're going to be talking about visuals later on in this presentation, but don't overuse it, but do visual support to enhance the must-knows, the key things you want your audience to remember as a result of your presentation. You've now come to the end of the main part, which we said was 80% of your presentation, approximately. So you've told them what you're going to do. You've told them the story. We now need to summarize. We need to finish up the presentation, and that is approximately 10% of your presentation time. This is really important, this, because people's concentration curves may have been dipping slightly, and you want to bring them back up so they certainly remember the must-knows, the key points that you're trying to get over. And you really want to get them hooked in at the end so they go, oh yes, I can remember this. So it's important that you summarize the main points. It's not repeating all your presentation again. You're just repeating the messages and the key findings if necessary, so people know what you've done and what they've gone through. So it may just remind them of the structure. You also want to state and apply your expectations to the audience as a result of the presentation, which actually comes from your presentation objective. Also request action or commitment and check that they do understand. So is everybody happy about that? Does everybody understand what I'm trying to do? And make it clear to the audience that you've reached the end. Don't just sort of saunter off quietly. Do make it clear that you've ended by thanking them for listening and finishing on a high note at that point. Now, it may be also useful to consider when to take questions, because I would recommend that you may well want to take questions before your summary. The reason for that is it links in very nicely. You've finished your middle bit. Any questions, take the questions, and then you can go into your summary, and it's very much as though you really have finished your presentation. You can take the questions at the end of your summary if you want to, but it may not be quite so impactful. You still need to thank them for listening and make sure they know that you actually have finished. You've now completed putting your presentation together. You've done the introduction, you've done the middle bit, and you've actually done the summary. You've now got to think about how am I going to visually support the presentation. And the key thing here is not to do too many visuals. Visuals are here to support your must-knows. They're here to help you guide through. They're really road signs that help you from one point to the next point. Too many visuals will confuse your audience and not help them to remember the things that you're trying to get over to them. As a bit of a rule of thumb, we tend to say perhaps in a 20-minute presentation, no more than 10 slides. So perhaps a couple for the introduction, maximum 7 for the middle, and then 1 for the summary. So just keep them nice and simple so it enhances and gets the key points over. And maybe when you start preparing your visuals, think about like a storyboard. Go through your actual script that you've put together and begin to perhaps put something together for introduction, then the middle bits, and then the summary, and begin to draw on each slide what you think would be appropriate to enhance the points that you're trying to get over. So don't go wild. Don't go wild and just think, I must do PowerPoint presentation. Get everything ready first, then do your presentation slides or visuals that you're trying to do. Some of the things you need to consider about preparing slides, I put some slides up here on the screen for you to consider. And as you can see from this one here, the first thing we need to really think about is trying to keep them simple. This is quite a simple slide. People need to remember it. Complicated, too many numbers, too many figures, whether it be charts or pie charts or bar charts, whatever they're going to be, will get very confusing. To try to keep them simple. I'd also recommend a maximum of 3 colours. Too many colours will confuse, and as you can see on this slide here, I've only used actually three colours. Use graphics, so perhaps pictures and graphs that are easily understood, but they've got to relate to what you're trying to get over. So as you can see here, we've actually used a picture to try and enhance so people remember it. Always use a heading. Why use a heading? Well, one of the reasons for using heading is that if somebody should perhaps lose concentration for a bit in the audience, when they look up again, they can actually see what you're talking about, what area you're into. Use bullet points. Ensure they are easily read, easy to remember, and easy for you to follow. Don't make it complicated, trying to get the must-knows over, just trying to use bullet points as you go along. Not too wordy. What's the problem if you get too wordy? Again, as I said earlier, people won't remember. It's a huge slide, but sometimes you see spreadsheets across the actual visual. They don't take it in. They're trying to take it in. Perhaps they just can't see it and they can't work it out. You're actually making it hard for your audience. Try to make it easy for them to remember. Always start your slides from left to right, top to bottom, particularly in the Western world. That's the way we read. The audience will start to read that way through. It makes it easy for them. Put important information in the center. Similar we've done here. The eye tends to focus into the center of your visual. Now, please ensure the font is large enough for everyone to see. For example, use your standard Arial or whatever your standard for your company is, and perhaps 20 and above on a font size. People must be able to see. If you've got a big audience, make them bigger. Make sure the people at the back of the room can easily read and see what they are. Don't get too clever so that people only remember your visuals and not the content of your presentation. Today, sometimes you get cars that zip in and zip out and noises and all different graphics. You're trying to get them to remember the key points. If it enhances it, great. But if it's just for an extra gimmick, people will remember that and not what you're trying to say. Always remember to spell check PowerPoint presentations. And remember, with PowerPoint, it will not spell check caps. It will only spell check ordinary writing. So do remember that. Now, sometimes it's worth thinking about if you're actually going to use flip charts as well, because that just gives you a bit of variety to the type of visuals you're using. So even with visuals, you can prepare them in advance. You can draw pictures on them. Again, the same type of areas and rules to go through. Use headings, make them nice and simple, but they can be quite useful, especially in small groups. Reveal only one bullet at a time and let your audience read them. Please leave them on the screen. Don't reveal everything at once. They'll try to read the whole thing, but give them time. Don't worry about pausing. Always look at your audience when you're presenting, not at the screen. They can hear you better, they can see you. You've got the contact with the audience as well. And do remember, always blank out your visuals when not in use, i.e. turn the flip chart over, or in the PowerPoint, press the B button, or unless you've got a woofer doofer that does it for you, turn the thing off. And don't use abbreviations. People sometimes don't know what you're talking about, so spell them out for them. Let's look at delivery techniques. So you've done everything you possibly can. You've prepared your presentation, you've got all the notes together, you've got your visual supports together, you've got stories, you've got analogies. It's looking great. But how do you actually deliver the presentation? Well, there's lots of things to think about, and it does actually come through experience and also builds confidence that you've actually done your preparation. One thing you need to think about is your voice control. Now, we're actually born with this wonderful amplification system here. We actually project the sound up from our diaphragms out through our mouths. So don't shout, but try to get enough sound to hit the back of the room so people can hear you. Make sure the people at the back can actually hear what you're saying. Also think about how you can vary your pitch, your tone, and the volume of what you're saying. So if you're very monotone, and hello, my name's Quentin Ross-Smith and I want to talk about presentation skills today, it can be very irritating to your audience. So again, use your amplification, vary the tones, vary the volume. Don't be worried about silence or at least going a bit quieter. People will lean forward and listen to you. And don't worry about the pause. Let people think it through. Put your point up and let them think it through. Speed, gosh, some people talk so quickly, especially when you're nervous. People talk very, very quickly. Try not to speak too fast. Slow it down. Give time for your audience to actually understand and hear what you're saying. So that's really looking at all the voice control. What about body language? Well, body language is trying to be upright and open. Try to look relaxed, which can be quite difficult. But if you're all sort of slouching with hands in your pockets, what are you saying to your audience? So look alert, trying to open up and be confident in front of the audience that you're delivering. Watch things like hands and mannerisms. You've got to be very careful. Sometimes people don't quite know what to do with their hands. So they start fiddling with them, and mannerisms like putting their hands through their hair and all these things. So just occasionally put your hands behind your back and then bring them back forward again so that you feel more relaxed. As I said, mannerisms. Watch clinking money in your pocket, pulling tops off pens, hands through the hair we talked about. And also sometimes you can get into yourself repeating the same word again, like right, okay, yes, good, okay, fine, that's fantastic. And people begin to pick up on that. So try to hear what you're saying. You actually think 3 or 4 times quicker than you speak. So try to listen what's coming out of your mouth as well when you do that. Audience contact. Now, how do you do that? Sometimes when you're very nervous, you might end up just looking at one person, and that can put a lot of pressure on them. So try to spread your favours around the audience. Perhaps start the sentence off in one side of the room and then work across to the other side of the room. Go to the back of the group, come forward again. So try to move them around with your eye contact. So don't stare people out, but you will find you've got someone on your side you feel confident with. You do tend to look at them, but do think about everybody else in the room. Now, nerves. Nerves are very natural. I actually believe that a certain amount of nerves is good. It makes you much more prepared. You check everything. You make sure you're ready. Too much nerves can be debilitating. It can be a problem to you. I think the way I deal with nerves particularly is making sure that I am fully prepared. The more prepared I am, the more I've checked everything, the more chance I've got to actually feel good about my presentation I'm about to give. Some people also say, always have a glass of water with you just in case your mouth should dry out. Good idea. And even Tic Tacs. Some people put little Tic Tac sweets under their tongue just to keep the saliva moving in the mouth so they don't dry up. Other things you can try, of course, is even squeezing your buttocks. Apparently that relaxes your muscles down, release them, and then you can begin to feel much more relaxed in yourself. But I really think to handle nerves well is preparation, rehearse, so you know exactly what's coming from it. And if you remember on the course, we talked a little bit about anchoring, which meant that you were trying to think something very positive. We're very good at remembering things that went wrong, presentations that went wrong, but actually, why not think about things that went well? Anchor yourself into key areas so you feel good about yourself before you stand up. If you do all those, and you get your analogies, your stories, you're going to have a cracking presentation. Finally, we've got to consider our final preparation. So you've worked really hard. You've got your objectives, you've written up your notes, you've put everything together, you've done your introduction, you've done your middle, you've done your summary. You've got everything there you've tried to do. You've thought about your delivery techniques. Well, what about the actual final prep? Highly recommend that if you can, the day before you go to the room and make sure things like all the equipment is working. Nothing worse than you get into the room, turn something on and it wasn't working. And someone at the back says, oh, that broke last week. So make sure that's all working. If you have projectors and things, are there spare bulbs and fuses available so they can be fixed? Have you got an extension cable just in case you want to add a bit of equipment in onto your laptop, whatever it is, and you need more electricity? Consider seating arrangements. Do you want people in crescents or do you want them in theatre style? Think about that. Lighting and temperature. There's nothing worse if people can't really see you very clearly, or perhaps you can't see them as well. Also, the room is so cold that they're not listening to you, or maybe just so hot that they can't listen to you as well. So think about that. Get in the day before and consider those areas. Any distractions? Are you on a roundabout? Is everybody looking out the window, watching cars going around? Are there lots of people walking by the windows? Are there people painting across the road and they're all watching it? Also consider, have you got your notes with you? I would always recommend you have notes with you, just in case anything should break down and you can still carry on. It helps your nerves. Have you got all your visual supports? Do they work? Do they come in at the right time? And what about your appearance? Look at your appearance. Have you just spilt something, coffee down your front or whatever it is? Don't make it so it distracts from people watching you. And finally, think of any last-minute developments that may come up in the news, which may alter some of the things you have to say that you know about. You may have to answer questions or objections during your presentation or at the end. And here's a few tips for you to consider. Always listen carefully to the question or the objection. Look at the person and try to decide from the manner and tone of voice why they are asking. Draw them out further if necessary. Repeat the question or objection back in your own words to ensure that you understand and everybody else has heard. If it's a complicated question or objection, divide it into parts and state which each one is before you answer. Relate your answer to the points you've made in your presentation. Don't raise new points. Answer briefly, keeping to the point. And if your answer must be more than a few sentences, give it structure, an introduction, a middle, and a summary. Don't try to put the questioner down or make fun of them. And if you don't have the information to the answer to the question, say so and ask if anybody in the audience can help. And don't argue under any circumstances. One thing you need to consider is how you actually write your notes up. There's several ways of doing that, and it is very personal to you. One thing I'd recommend is to use index cards. So you can use one card for each key point you're presenting. And again, it's useful to split that between your introduction, cards for your middle, and one for the summary. Things to remember is use large, clear writing that will jog your memory. Ensure they are easy to handle. Attach them together so they should fall on the floor. You can pick them all up in one as trying to sort them back out. Take cards from the front to the back and number each card so you know where you're up to. I always use different coloured pens or highlighters to emphasise the main points so the words actually bounce off the page to me. Only use bullet points. You're not reading a script. So those are quite useful. The other thing you can do is just use conventional notes. If you do, try to keep to one sheet of A4. Keep the amount of sheets to a minimum so as to avoid getting them mixed up. Again, same with the index cards. Use different coloured pens or highlighters to emphasise the main points. Use only bullet points. And again, you're not reading a script. These days with PowerPoint, of course, you can actually print the notes from your computer. Exactly the same again, using different coloured fonts to highlight each key point. And again, try only to use bullets, because again, you're not reading a script. You're just trying to get things to bounce off the page at you. If you are using flip charts, you can actually lightly pencil your notes onto the flip chart in the corner. The audience won't see it, but you can, and you can then read from there if you're just turning to your flip chart. Just gives you some thoughts, but do keep them simple. Remember KISS, keep them simple, stupid. That's the end of this short DVD, and I hope you found it useful and has highlighted the key points that we covered on the course. But should you want to get hold of me, my name and number is actually on the cover of the DVD, so don't hesitate to ring me if I can be of any further assistance. Best of luck in the future, and good luck with your presentations.